I am just whipping through these blocks and I can't wait to move on to block number 8. Hey friends, welcome back to my sewing room. My name is Becca and in today's video we are going to put together block number 8 for the Bright Side Quilt Along. This was a block of the month program that started in April 2021 and ended in March 2022, and it was free and included in our sew sampler boxes during that time. But don't worry, if this is a block of the month that you are just now learning about and maybe you lost the patterns and you got the boxes, or you never got the boxes, or you only got some of the boxes, I have a solution for you. In the description box down below this very video, you'll find a link for each one of the 12 blocks plus the 13th pattern to show you how to set all these blocks into the finished quilt. Each one of those patterns will cost you $4.98 as of the recording of this video, and you can pick them up and go back and watch my videos and sew all of the blocks together with me. It'll be a lot of fun. These blocks are really easy to put together, so if you are a beginner quilter, don't worry, you'll be able to do this. All right, let's get started. Oh yeah, one more thing. This is not my pattern, so I can't give you any of the cutting instructions. So I am picking up this video from the point where I have starched, ironed, and cut and labeled all of my fabrics according to the pattern instructions. So for the duration of this video, I'm going to refer to the fabrics as they're referenced in the pattern. Let's get started. Step number 1 is a doozy. We're going to take our fabric B and our fabric C's, and we're going to make 4 square to square units. We did this in a previous block. These are going to be pretty much the same thing. The first thing I'm going to do is take each one of these little white squares. This is my fabric B, and I am going to draw a line diagonally on the wrong side of every single one of these 16 squares. Now, if you have some diagonal seam tape, you could use that in your machine to totally skip this point, but we're going to be consistent and we're going to stick with the methods that I have been using all along. This line will serve as a guide for when we're sewing them onto the bigger squares. We're going to stitch one thread to the right side of that line when they're all paired up in each of the corners. And that's just going to give us enough room to add in our thread from our seam and then fold it over and allow this little white square to complete the corner on that larger square. Now that I have all those little white squares marked up, we're going to take 2 for each one of our 4 larger squares, and we're going to position them in opposite corners so that the line is running from the middle of one raw edge to the middle of the other raw edge. You don't want it running from the corner into the center of the block. This is not how you want it to be. You want to run from the middle to the middle, and you want both of the lines to be parallel to each other. We're going to take this to our machine and take a seam right literally next to this line that we just drew. One thread to the right of this one and one thread to the right of this one when we turn around and put it under our needle. Now that I have 2 of these squares attached to each of these larger 4 squares, I can test to make sure that I sewed these on correctly. If I put my finger between this peach square and this white square and just nudge this over, what I should see is this little triangle up here perfectly completes my square both from the top and the back. And if it doesn't, then that just means I missed it. I believe, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, if it's too small from the top, that means you sewed to the left of the line. And if it's too big from the back, then that means you sewed too far to the right of the line. So if you want to adjust, that's how you would do it. I'm going to test all of these to make sure that they look good. And then once they do, I'm going to trim away my excess fabric 1/4 of an inch away from that seam that I just sewed. You can save these. They make super cute little teeny tiny half square triangle units. Now that I've trimmed away all of my excess fabric, it's time to press these so that they're nice and flat. And then we're going to do the same thing that we just did to the opposite two corners. So let's get these little fabric bees laying nice and flat before we add anything else in. I finger pressed these to the side first just to get the squares ready for my iron to come in, and then I used my hot iron. Now I'm going to take 2 squares, and on the remaining corners, I'm going to put them opposite just like I did before, and I want to make sure that the lines are running parallel to each other, and we're going to stitch it the same exact way. Now we just trim away our fabric 1/4 of an inch away from that seam that we just sewed, just like we did before. You keep these if you want to. And now we're going to press these just like we did before. I'm going to use my fingers first to make sure that I can get the seams to go over. Everything looks good and feels good. This is just nudging it. Nudge it with my fingers, and then we convince it with the iron. If you want to be super precise, you can measure each of these squares to make sure that they square up according to the pattern instructions. Never hurts to double check before you proceed. That is the end of step 1. Let's move on to step 2. We're going to set these cute little economy blocks aside. We're going to grab our fabric A and our fabric D. These are 2 rectangles of that same fabric that we just used, and we're going to make 4 strip sets. So when I sew them together, I'm going to sew them together on the long edge. I'm going to chain piece this, which just means I'm not going to break my thread in between seams. I'm just going to keep feeding more fabric for the machine to sew for me under the needle. Not even going to lift my presser foot. Just going to put the fabric underneath the lip of the front end of the presser foot and let the feed dogs pull it in and sew it together for me. Once these are all sewn together, because I chain pieced them, they're all connected. So I'm going to take them to my little blade saver tool, and I'm just going to force the thread on the blade saver to cut those apart. And now we're going to open them up. And the instructions actually say that we're going to press these seams open. So we must be doing this because there's going to be a lot of bulk in the block. So the way I do that is I open the fabric with the wrong sides faced up, and I just use my fingers to separate this seam, and then I pull my fingernail down on that seam to get it to lay nice and open. Really simple. There are a ton of tools out there that you can use to press seams open. They all work just fine. This is just my way of doing it because I don't really press my seams open very often. Now that those are all prepped, all I have to do is get my hot iron and just set it right on top of those seams, and that's going to get the fabric to lay nice and flat. Now that these strip sets are made, we're ready to move on to step number 3. In step number 3, we're going to take 2 of the 4 strip sets that we made, and all 4 of those diamond units that we made, we're going to put 2 diamond units on either side of that strip set, and we're going to take a seam here and a seam here, and we're going to press it towards this middle piece, and this is going to make the top row and the bottom row for our quilt block. Now, when we're doing this, take a look at the back side of how these seams come together. There is actually a very faint X right here where the 2 threads intersect. If you stay just 1 thread to the right of that X, don't go through it, don't go to the left of it, then when you are putting this fabric onto your strip set, you're not going to lose your point. You can also take a little bit of time just to line things up so that this point is touching this seam right here. You can line it up like this, roll it back, and peek to make sure everything is lining up perfect. I'm not going to stress about it. Everything should be approximately the same size. What I am going to do, though, is make sure that when I put my seam in my machine, this diamond unit is on top and my strip set is on the bottom. That way I can keep an eye on that X. And if I'm a little too close to it, I can slow down and shift over to the right a thread or 2. If you want it to be absolutely perfect, this is something I would probably recommend that you take the time to line everything up and you pin it. You have one side on, and that point is pretty doggone good. Let's do the other side. We're going to sew with the diamond unit on top and the strip set on the bottom. We're going to open it up, and that point is pretty good as well. We'll set this aside and do the last row. And the last row is pieced together, and these points look like they're pretty good too. Let's press this nice and flat before we move on to the next step. For these, I'm just going to press it from the back side first. And then I'll give it a little bit of heat from the top. Now we have our top and our bottom row. And in step 5, we're going to take those 2 strip units and our center square and make our middle row. We're going to position our rail units just like that so that the color is on the outer edge of the block and our center square is going to go right in the middle. Take a seam here, and press them to the rail units. We're going to press it with our fingers first, and then with our hot iron second. And now the final step is just to assemble all 3 rows together. If we followed our pressing instructions for the pattern, all of these seams should nest nicely together. Before I sew these together, I think it's important to note that we've got some points in our top and bottom rows that we don't want to lose when we sew the middle row on. And so the way I'm going to handle that is by putting my right sides together, but just like I did before, I'm going to sew with my diamond units on top so I can keep an eye on those X's. Just make sure to sew on the side that has the white rectangle, not the side that has the orange one. This orange peachy one is on the outer ring of your block. I'm really saying that more for me because I am pretty sure I would have sewn on the wrong side. We're going to press these towards this middle row. So the top row is on, and I'm just going to press it down towards the middle. And then I'm going to take the bottom row and sew it on the same way. Now I'll take my hand to smooth that row over where I need it to be too. And then my hot iron will come in and press this from the back. Give it a little bit of tension while I'm doing this, but I don't want to stretch it. Just want to pull it taut. I'm going to press that seam. I'll press the other seam. And then just like I've done in the past, I'm going to flip it over, press it from the top, make sure it lays nice and flat, nice and square, nice and straight. Want to make sure there's no errors with my block. I get a little bit of best press. I say give it a little bit, but in reality, I probably douse it. Then I get my iron and I give it a final good press to really make this block lay nice and crisp and nice and flat. I'm just going to work my iron slowly over all of the block, being very careful to not pull or stretch or warp the fabric. Apply heat in every section and a little bit of pressure. And there you have it. I have a couple of points on this block that are not perfect. In fact, probably about half of them are not great. This is just my way of showing you that the block can still be beautiful without the points being absolutely precise. Once I put this in my quilt top and I have all that other visual interest happening and it's quilted and it's washed, points like this where they're just off a couple of threads are not going to matter if I lost the point. That said, if you are a perfectionist or this is going to be a show quality quilt, it's a quilt that you're going to enter in a show, maybe that's something that you want to fix. You do whatever makes you happy in your sewing room. I am quite satisfied with the way this looks, so we're going to leave it. Last step for this block is to square it up. This should measure 9.5 inches. Let's see how we did. I'm going to grab my square ruler. I'm going to make sure that my 45-degree line is going through that center block. And I'm going to make sure that my seams here are straight and relatively even, but I've got one more added complexity to this block. I want to make sure that once I'm done cutting everything, not only is the block square, but all of these points, I want to make sure that I've got about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric before that point comes on. Otherwise, when I sew this block into my overall quilt, I'm going to lose those points. So let's try to preserve them if we can. That said, if we lose the points, it's not the worst thing in the world. Let's trim it up and see how we do. I think I'm going to be pretty good. I think I'm going to be pretty accurate. But we won't know until we square it up. Just a little bit off of the right and the top. We're going to flip it over and put that brand new, freshly cut 90-degree angle on the 9.5-inch mark on the bottom and left side of my ruler. And now I'm going to clean up the right side and along the top. And I did expect, by the way, to get a good amount of fabric off of the block when I squared it up, because when I sew these, I actually use a scant 1/4 inch. And I had somebody ask me in a video before, what is a scant 1/4 inch? A scant 1/4 inch means that when I am sewing, I'm not using a full 1/4 inch to sew. I'm actually making my seam a little bit smaller so that when I open up the fabrics, I know I'm going to have to square down. Since I didn't square up all these little blocks, I figured that the overall block was going to be a little bit bigger. I rather sew with a smaller seam allowance and square it up when I'm done. So this is it. This is our perfectly imperfect block number 8. I absolutely love it. And I got to tell you, when I saw the diagram of this block, I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so complex. And there's no way that I am going to do this quickly and easily. But then when I stopped and I looked at the steps and how they had us put this block together, this is super easy. The only thing that you need to be careful of are the points. Just make sure that you take the time to sew with an accurate seam allowance. You want to be consistent throughout the whole thing. And you pin if you need to, if you want your points to stay nice and perfect. That's everything for this video, guys. Thank you so much for sewing with me. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed what you saw here, and come on back real soon for block number 9. I'll see you guys all then. Bye.